When I started this program 5.5, maybe 6 years ago, I met with the folks at Fox. They couldn't have been nicer. And I said, I want to do a different kind of show. I don't want a whole bunch of guests. I don't want everything to be based on the news cycle. I want to take the 1 hour I have on Sundays, really 40 minutes, and spend time talking about what's happening to the country. Might involve philosophy, history, whatever it involves. But I'm very concerned about where we're headed. This is certainly one of those programs. I want to take a little bit of time and talk to you about what's happening to America. It's not good enough to have legal analysts. It's not good enough to have political operatives. We can bounce around from political topic to legislative topic and so forth and so on. That's not what I'm doing tonight. That's not what I ever want to do, really. So let's step back and take a look at what's going on. First, we have to recognize that we have a growing police state in America. And that police state is controlled by one party, the Democrat Party. And they're using all the instrumentalities of the culture and all the instrumentalities of government to basically monopolize this society. And that's what autocratic parties do. They can call themselves whatever they want. The Democrat Party has a very horrific history. It's never really accepted this country. From its beginning, that is the beginning of the Democrat Party, it has always been hostile to our principles. It's responsible for the Civil War. And in that Civil War, it was not only North against South and pro-slavery against abolitionists, it was Democrat Party against Republican Party. And after the Civil War, the Democrat Party never gave up. Right into the 1960s, and they haven't given up today. They've just put on a different mask and pushed a different type of autocracy. And that's what we're facing today. And it's at a pinnacle right now. So I can talk about this candidate, I can talk about that candidate. I can talk about who's the smoother talker, who's not the smoother talker. I can talk about this case and the fourth charge of the 17th indictment against Donald Trump and so forth and so on. All important, but all irrelevant if we don't understand what's happening to America. I would argue, just me personally, that the better guests, if people are going to have a lot of guests, are those, yes, from time to time, who really are involved in day-to-day, hand-to-hand combat politically, but people who can explain what's taking place to the country, people who can communicate it to our fellow citizens, ideas of consequences. And the consequences right now are dire. You feel it, you see it, you know it. In every way, you're wondering to yourselves, as I am, what the heck is happening to the country? So let's talk about this briefly. There's a war on the Supreme Court led by the Democrats. They want to pack it and they want to take it over. That's what they do in autocracies, control the judiciary. There's a war on the Electoral College. They want you to believe the majority vote should win. What that would mean realistically in America is that the cities would control the federal government, and tens of millions of Americans who do not live in the cities, in rural areas and suburban areas and so forth, would be without representation. They want to nationalize the voting system. They want to take much of what they did in California, which used to be a Republican state, destroy the nature of the electoral system, change the nature of the citizenry, and now they have supermajorities in both houses in Ronald Reagan's home of California, where we can't win elections. They want to eliminate the filibuster. Why? Because if they win an election cycle, they want to be able to impose the most egregious, ubiquitous, radical agenda, which will be impossible to unravel, and put it in there by a simple majority having won one election. That's not republicanism, small r, is it? They want to expand the Senate, not to add senators, to add 4 Democrat senators, 2 from Puerto Rico and 2 from the District of Columbia. None of this is in the best interest of the country. It's all in the best interest of what? The Democrat Party, centralization, and power. Why do they want open borders? They're even complaining now in New York City and New York. They're very upset about it. Biden doesn't care what Democrat strongholds think, because he knows in New York City they're going to vote Democrat no matter what. No matter what. So what is he doing? It's pure politics. When you understand that it's all about power for the Democrat Party, they want to flip Texas. They flip Texas blue, Republicans can never, ever win the presidency again. They're in the middle of flipping Georgia. They're almost done flipping Arizona. They flipped Virginia, except for a battle that took place with Youngkin that pulled it back. But these are defensive battles that go on and on and on now. The Southeast is going blue. The South is going blue. Running out of territory. That's what it's all about. It's that simple. He doesn't care, Biden, how much sex trafficking is going on down there, how much drugs are coming across the country. Remember this. No autocratic party, whether it's a communist party, a fascistic party, or the Democrat Party, gives a damn about the people. They're all about power. Let's go through this with some specificity. Executive Order 14019 directs more than 600 federal agencies to engage in voter registration and mobilization efforts, despite a lack of congressional appropriations or authorization for these agencies to engage in such activity. Joe Biden signs an executive order and he tells the federal bureaucracy, 600 departments and agencies, I want you to go out there and register people and do 1,000 other things. To do what? To get Democrats to vote. Your tax dollars, the federal government taking sides. There is no difference between the federal bureaucracy and the Democrat Party. And when a Republican wins, the federal bureaucracy's job is to sabotage the Republican. This is the permanent state. Nobody has ever done what Joe Biden is doing right now. Department of Justice to monitoring polling places across the country. They did this in 2020. They had no legal authority whatsoever. And what did they do? They dispatched in 24 states and over 60 counties lawyers and volunteer lawyers either from or reporting to the most radical unit within the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Unit, that's controlled by a bigot. So you can see the extent to which they want to insinuate themselves into elections. They also want to attack people who are not part of their base, and they want to protect people and organizations that are. The infamous October 4, 2021 memo from Merrick Garland to federal law enforcement and intelligence activities within his own department. I am directing the FBI, working with each U.S. attorney, to convene meetings with federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial leaders in federal judicial districts within 30 days of the issuance of this memorandum. Who are they targeting? You. Parents at school board meetings. These meetings will facilitate the discussion of strategies for addressing threats against school administrators, board members, and so on. We also know that the National School Board Association and the teachers' unions were behind it. Unbelievable. Coming out of the United States Department of Justice. Here's another one. Unclassified for official use only, FBI document. It wasn't just the Richmond office. What are they doing? They want to send agents into Catholic churches that are traditional churches that practice their faith mostly in Latin, like Antonin Scalia's Catholic Church did, because they said that there's extremism being motivated, potentially violent extremism in these Catholic churches. Why? Because the Southern Poverty Law Center told them. So these are pro-lifers. These are people of faith. This is all under Biden. The police state. Republicans to hold hearing on DOJ targeting pro-lifers. What did they find out? In 2022, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division charged 26 pro-life individuals with FACE Act violations. So now you're not even allowed to protest in front of an abortion clinic. So they're attacking pro-lifers in front of abortion clinics. And it's even worse than that. How many cases have they brought where pro-life facilities, anti-abortion facilities, have been attacked, have been vandalized? Almost none. Almost none. And so you can see what's taking place here. There's even a whole lot more. Biden's judicial appointments outpace all presidents since JFK. You haven't heard this. Nobody's reporting on this. He is packing the district and circuit courts with radical left-wing activists, and you see the consequences when it comes to cases across the country and Donald Trump, all over the judiciary. These aren't real, professionals who are really going to adjudicate the law objectively. These are bomb-throwing leftists, like the one who's involved in the Trump trial in Washington, D.C. That's who he's filling up the courts with now. And everybody praises Mitch McConnell. Oh, he's been very good on judges. Where are you, Mitch? These people should be blocked. Where are you, Lindsey Graham? You're on the committee. They should be blocked. They are literally devouring the judiciary right now. Now listen to this. It's from my new book, The Democrat Party Hates America, as is most of this. Domestic monitoring and surveillance of communications by American citizens have been growing, but are now exploding under the Biden administration. Judge Terry Doughty, a federal district judge, recently wrote, "The government has used its power to silence the opposition to COVID-19 vaccines, opposition to COVID-19 masking and lockdowns, opposition to the lab leak theory of COVID-19, opposition to the validity of the 2020 election, opposition to President Biden's policies, statements that the Hunter Biden laptop story was true, and opposition to policies of the government officials in power. All were suppressed." That's a finding of fact. It is quite telling that each example or category of suppressed speech was conservative in nature. This targeted suppression of conservative ideas is a perfect example of viewpoint discrimination of political speech. American citizens, wrote the judge, have the right to engage in free debate about the significant issues affecting the country. Well, who's stopping them? Biden and the Democrats and the Department of Justice. That's who's stopping them. It's actually quite appalling. And so is the system of justice in this country, which is becoming a complete joke. You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's one thing to have a judge in a courtroom and a prosecutor in the courtroom and a jury in the courtroom. But if the judge is a liberal Democrat activist, and the prosecutor is a liberal Democrat activist, and the jury is made up of citizens in a community that voted 95% for Joe Biden, it's pretty tough for Donald Trump to get a fair election, don't you think? And the idea that all of this stuff just happened spontaneously, that he's indicted by a Democrat DA, Soros-backed, campaigning to indict Trump in Manhattan on non-disclosure agreements, essentially, that somehow they violated the state and federal election code, which everybody said is outrageous, over 30 charges. And yet that prosecutor, he hasn't been sanctioned. He hasn't been disbarred. The judge in the case is a Democrat, and they're proceeding. And shortly after that, we have a so-called special counsel, a special counsel who I want to tell you a little bit more about. Many of you are Tea Party activists. In 2010, the Tea Party came on the scene, again, grassroots group, spontaneous, and Obama didn't like it, and Biden didn't like it. The Department of Justice didn't like it. So who was the head of the public integrity section back then? Jack Smith, Mr. Special Counsel, who's brought 2 cases against Donald Trump. And as the Washington Examiner pointed out, Darrell Issa, back several years ago, he released a report in 2014 that said the Department of Justice arranged the meeting with Lois Lerner. Remember her? The senior IRS person who is sort of in charge of this war on the Tea Party. After Smith, that is, Jack Smith, read a September 2010 New York Times article, "Donor Names Remain Secret as Rules Shift," which opened with an anecdote about a conservative group. The report revealed Lerner and an IRS commissioner, Sarah Ingram, spoke with the reporter on background for the article. So they plant the article. Jack Smith sees the article. What does he do? After reading it, Smith wrote to Department of Justice colleagues, quote, "Check out the article on front page of New York Times regarding misuse of nonprofits for indirectly funding campaigns. This seems egregious to me," Smith wrote to his colleagues. "Could we ever charge an 18 U.S.C. Section 371 conspiracy to violate laws of the United States for misuse of such nonprofits to get around existing campaign finance laws on limits?" It was targeted, the article, on conservatives and the Tea Party. So Smith is saying, can't we criminalize this? And he's asking his people, can we use this statute? How do we go after these groups? How do we punish them? How do we put these people in prison? IRS Commissioner Sarah Ingram oversees these groups, he wrote. "Let's discuss tomorrow, but maybe we should try to set up a meeting." Smith organized meetings with his senior leadership, including Richard Palger, director of the DOJ's Election Crimes Branch, with one meeting saying the DOJ considered a possible 501 campaign finance investigation. Quote, "The fact that Richard Pilger, I guess, and Jack Smith had interaction with Lois Lerner in 2010 and 2013, that you had a database of 1.1 million pages of taxpayer information, donor C4 information. You had it for 4 years, and some of that information was confidential, writes Jim Jordan. All that, in fact, all that cries out for a special prosecutor against Smith. Smith recommended his unit meet with Ingram to discuss DOJ enforcement against the Tea Party. Pilger expressed skepticism and told Smith be very challenging his criminal work in the near term. Nancy Simmons, the unit's senior counsel, said she didn't see a viable way to make a prosecutorial case. Smith nevertheless pushed forward. Pilger reached out to Ingram's office in September 2010 to set up an IRS meeting. Ingram told her staff, "We have to do this," and asked Lerner to organize. Jack Smith was behind the entire war on the Tea Party. I've got a lot more to say. There's a lot more going on in this country. And we are now engaged in, open your eyes wide, in a Democrat Party-led revolution that is destroying the foundational principles of this country and all these institutions that were built up. And of course, like all autocratic regimes, they dress themselves up in a self-righteous, pro-justice, pro-equality movement. They are not. They're an autocratic movement. I'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.